Hello and welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. This is episode 566. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility through this podcast since 2005. Today, we are talking about poetry. Write a poem, save your life. So I invited Meredith Heller onto the show to share the benefits of writing poetry, what goes into a poetry toolbox, and how a poem is a photo made with words. A gentle reminder to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and to visit kimberlywilson.com/podcast for more. You'll find the show notes for this episode at kimberlywilson.com/566. And if you are new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link in the show notes for you to learn more, or just visit us at kimberlywilson.com/new. A gentle reminder that a tranquil year 2022 is going to be happening and will open for applications mid-November. And there's a link to learn more in the show notes. Would love to have you with us. It's where I will be doing the majority of my work next year. And it's really going to be a delightful group and a delightful kind of deep dive into so many tranquility tools. And again, working with the book, Year of Tranquility, for our weekly lessons. Meredith Heller studied writing and education in the graduate departments of Johns Hopkins University, Naropa University, and Goddard College. She has contributed poetry and essays to many publications and lives in Marin County, California. More information at meredithheller.com. Welcome, Meredith.
Thanks, Kimberly. So happy to be here.
Well, congrats on this book, Write a Poem, Save Your Life, a guide for teens, teachers, and writers of all ages. Beautiful book.
Thank you so much.
So tell me, how did you start writing poetry? How did this kind of become a bit of like a life journey for you?
Yeah. Well, I left home early to find a deeper way of living, and I went off by myself at a very young age, 13 years old, and lived in the woods along the Potomac River outside of Washington, D.C., where I grew up. And I had a lot of challenging experiences as a teen, and I was already writing a bit, and I was a singer-songwriter. And so I found that writing poetry and writing songs gave me a medium through which to express the overwhelming feelings that I was having, and the loss and disappointment and loneliness that I was experiencing being on my own at such a young age. And I really found that through poetry, writing and songwriting, it helped me sort through my feelings and make clarity out of my feelings, and also turn what was so sad and disappointing into something meaningful and something tangible that I could reflect back on and share with others. So that was how I started on my own poetry writing. And then because of that, when I was struggling with trying to find a school that where I could develop and search for what I was interested in, I couldn't find that. So I ended up going to a few schools and weaving together my different areas of interest, which were poetic writing and holistic healing. and embodied learning. And that was one of my challenges in school, was that I was a kinesthetic learner. I needed to do things. I grew up dancing. So I needed to do things with my body in order to learn. And just sitting in a desk, my brain didn't work, but nobody really understood that back then. So, so as I was going through different schools, I was hiking one day and I just had this epiphany that I bet there were other kids who were like me, who were bright and creative, but slipping through the cracks and losing faith in themselves and in society. And I just had this hit that if I could get to those kids before they gave up on themselves, that everything that I'd been through would be worth something, would be meaningful. And so that really gave me the impetus and the inspiration to weave together everything, all of my life experiences in a way that I could offer and help other people.
Beautiful. Well, you know what I really like about the book too is in the front, you've got the Poetry Toolbox. Right?
Yeah.
And so can you talk us through a little bit about what are some of the things that go into the Poetry Toolbox? Because, you know, for some of our listeners, you know, I think for some people in general, poetry can feel as if it's like elusive, like it's hard to grasp or, you know, wrap your head around, much less write. And so I love how you've kind of broken it out with this Poetry Toolbox. So can you walk us through some of those tools in the toolbox?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good point that you make. I think a lot of people can be intimidated by the word or the concept of poetry, especially. I mean, it's one thing to read it, which is often overwhelming and, like you said, elusive, but then to write it, people are like, what do we do? So there's a couple things. I do offer the Poetry Toolbox, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But one of the main things about this book was that I really wanted it to be accessible for everyone. And so, I call it poetry, but these days I'm really, calling it more, my program is called Writing by Heart. And it's about finding our own voice, that it doesn't need to sound like any kind of poetry you've ever heard before. It doesn't need to be something lofty or something, you know, that's only beautiful. I mean, the poetry of today and the kind of poetry that I'm holding space for people to write is about finding our own voice and writing in a way that nourishes us, that creates meaning and insight from our own lives and our own experiences, harvests the meaning and the insight, and then the fulfillment of having something that you've created for yourself, or if you choose to share it with other people. There's so much fulfillment in that. To bring a poem we've written and read it for someone and to be witnessed and received is so healing and empowering, to be heard and to express what's inside of us. So, that's what I preface the whole toolbox with, is that we're not specifically writing like to write a masterpiece poem that gets published. We're writing to feed ourselves, nourish our own souls, and also to hopefully get to the place in our writing where we don't know what we're going to say. We don't know what we're going to write. And to me, this is where it really gets alive. And this is what brings us back to our writing as a companion, as a refuge, as a place, as a mirror, a place where we go to learn about ourselves. So that's the beginning of the entire toolbox, which completely is a different orientation than most people learn about poetry. So I want it to be really accessible. So then the Poetry Toolbox hat, I talk about metaphor and simile, which are some of the closest friends and tools of any poet. In metaphor, we identify with something, and in simile, we compare. So in metaphor, I can say, my heart is the ocean. And you know so much about me if I tell you my heart is an ocean than if I were to give you an entire page about me. And simile, my heart is like an ocean. Maybe it isn't the ocean exactly, but it's like the ocean. And the like gives a little more room for interpretation, and a little more room for even something that we do often in poetry, which we call telling it slant. Maybe we don't tell it exactly the way it is. Maybe we disguise it or eclipse the truth just a little, and we have that freedom in poetry. And there's something beautiful about that, in that it makes an open field for interpretation for the reader or the listener. So we work with metaphor and simile, imagery. And then I have a special kind of approach and editing that I always tell my students and workshop participants about, which is flesh it out or boil it down. And we're usually doing one of these two things or a combination in a poem. So we flesh it out by adding as much detail as possible, right? Like I can tell you, I'm having a cup of tea. And that's not very interesting. But if I tell you, Kimberly, that this morning I am having a cup of mint tea in this cup, that this mug that I made on a potter's wheel, a kick wheel. So it wasn't even an electric wheel. And I created the glaze out of crushed shell to get this specific color. And this is my mug that I use every morning. And suddenly this cup of tea becomes very important. And you're going to remember all day the kind of tea I had, that I made this mug, and what I made this glaze out of. So detail and specifics that are unique to us are part of what brings a piece to life and makes it special for us, and other people are going to remember that. Then there's the other half. So this is fleshing it out, giving it all the detail. Then there's the other part, which is boiling it down to the bare bones. I might take that same phrase and say, mint tea, mug I made on the potter's wheel, glaze from crushed shell. That's it. And the sparseness is evocative. And it's a different rhythm that's going to drop into you in a different way. And you're going to remember that too. So those are two of my very favorite tools: flesh it out or boil it down. And it's a great phrasing because people remember it, especially kids. Kids remember that. Flesh it out or boil it down. And I always give them the imagery of like this skeleton. You know, I can put all the muscles and the everything and the clothing on there, or I can just take it all off. So we just see my skeleton walking around, you know, with just the bare bones. So that's what we do in Poetry Toolbox. And then I talk about the inner critic a little bit and how to make friends, or at least invite that inner critic to lunch or to tea, you know, and say, hey, you know, why do you beat me up so much? You know, and do we have anything we can learn from each other? And if not, get out. You know, leave me alone.
Move on.
Move on. Yeah.
I love
Go
it.
find someone else.
Yeah. Go elsewhere. No, it's really great. So the flesh it out, boil it down. I also, you know, the point of view, right?
Yes.
I thought was really interesting. Of course, editing and revising, page layout. There was another piece too that I really liked. And this is all at the start of the book, listeners, but you know, she has ideas on, I thought maybe we could talk about this, a writing journal, when and where to write, setting up a writing sanctuary. So, can you talk about those three things also? Because we may have some listeners who are interested in writing, maybe not poetry, maybe something else, and this would, of course, apply to them also. Well, so would the simile and the metaphor and all of that, the detail, all of that also.
Yeah, that's really great. I think it's so important to have a quiet. Well, actually, I'll address that. I tend to write. I need quiet to write. Some people need stimulation to write. So first and foremost, figuring out, if you don't already know, by experimenting, where do you do your best writing? And then we do different kinds of writing in different kinds of situations. And that's great too. So how do you want to write today when you're going to write? Are you stimulated by a busy place? Are you a person who likes to go sit in a cafe and people watch and include some of the things that are around you in what you're writing? The smells, the colors, the way somebody walks, the way somebody eats their pastry. You can include all of that. Airports are fabulous places to glean tidbits about like information. Whenever I'm in an airport, I see people coming and going, and there's so much emotion and there's so much fodder there for writing. I always invent the stories. It doesn't matter to me whether they're real or not. I invent them. Oh, that's what's happening with those people, right? So that's fun. Personally, for me, I need absolute silence when I write. So that's where the creating your own writing nook, I say, create your own writing nook, your witch wing, your bitch barn, your creative nook. There's some great terms out there. A she shed, like the man cave, and a place where you have things around you that inspire you. Maybe you're looking out a window. Maybe it's outside. A place where you feel centered and where you can focus to tune in both on what's happening inside you, as well as how you perceive the world around you. And I think the best writing is the place where the two of those meet, where the way that we interpret and perceive the world around us affects who we are and how we think and feel. And to be able to translate that place into writing is what's moving and exciting for both the writer and the reader or the listener. And then choosing a writing journal. I have a big piece about really asking people to write with pen and paper, as opposed to just pushing our fingers on the device. I believe and have experienced that writing with pen and paper is very powerful, and it engages our bodies, our emotions, our nervous systems, and access to deep psyche where the metaphors of our being live. And I think there's something about using our bodies and using our hands as we write, which is almost like dancing across the paper. And just that little bit of resistance that happens when we pull the pen across the texture of the paper engages our like muscle memory, and uses more of us than just pushing straight down onto keys. So I always ask people to at least try this and experiment and see if there's a difference, and see if you write from a different part of yourself. See if you can access more in one way or another. I find there's a lot of difference for me when I write by hand versus when I write on a computer. I tend to do my best writing first by hand, then putting it into my device, and then I can edit more easily. Writing journals, this is a very individual thing. I like a sketch journal. with spiral on the side so that I can open it flat, so that I can turn it and make it just the size of one half of it. Yes, exactly. Just like that. And I don't like lines because I like to write large sometimes, and I like to doodle sometimes, and I like to make a mess in my journal. And lines, I find, limit me. Some people love lines. That's great. Again, to experiment and find what's best for you. And it doesn't have to be fancy, you know, it can be a spiral notebook. And then finding a pen you love. I have a very specific pen I love.
What's your favorite? Mine are these Pilot G2s. They flow like so beautifully on the page. I always like to ask writers, what are their favorite pens?
Yeah, that's so great. That sounds really good. I think my pen fell into my sofa here.
Oh, no.
Mine is a Papermate Flare.
Oh, yes.
Point. Because I don't have to press too hard.
Yep.
I get a nice fine point. It's a deep, rich black. It's a little moist when it first goes on the paper. And there's just, I don't know, there's something inspiring about that. Like it feels like the ink is almost alive.
It is. And that comes in colors too.
And it comes in colors. Yeah. You can get a whole set of
colors.
Them.
Yep. I have a whole set right in front of me. Yep. They're great.
Yeah, and there's like pale lavender and leaf green, and you know, it's just fun. So I do that. And I like the 5x8 ish sizes because I can put it in a backpack or a purse easily, and it fits in my hand easily. I was going to help a friend get a journal yesterday to start writing, and she got the sketch pad, but she got the large one, like the 9x11. And I get it. That works for her. I've worked with those. They're a little big for me. So it's, again, I think that the thing that's great is that all of this becomes holographic and a metaphor for learning how to listen to ourselves for what works best for us. And it's not a static thing. It's always shifting. Today I might write better inside by myself in a sketch journal. Tomorrow I might write better on lined paper in a cafe. And so this is the process of learning to show up with ourselves for our writing. What's happening now? What's happening in me now? How do I notice, pay attention, listen deeply to myself, and then express? How do I express it in a way that is meaningful and fulfilling to me? And if someone else is moved by it, great.
And you know, Meredith, I love this because I once had a writing teacher who told me, she said, and she taught writing like in university. And she said, I can tell people who wrote their piece first by hand or via computer, right? You know, it's like, I mean, of course, everyone would turn it in via computer, but she was like, I can tell. I just thought that was so interesting. It's like, you know, because, and there was this great NPR article a while back that was saying that students in school who take notes via hand versus computer via hand, they're more likely to retain it because you have to slow it down a little bit. And so do you think that's kind of what it is with our writing? Also, we have to slow it down and really almost like get into it in a more juicy way than by typing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you're saying that. I actually remember that article. I saw that. I do. I think that there is, whenever we write something, we have to master the information. There's this integration that happens to be able to take it from thought or feeling or bodily sensation into language. And when we're writing it, yeah, like you're saying, I think we slow down, we spend a little more time, we get more centered, give ourselves the space to really feel and inhabit and master whatever it is we're learning or feeling. And again, I just think that we have been writing with our hands in this motion, which is really kind of like dancing on paper. And it engages our bodies and our hearts and our nervous systems in this deeper way than just pushing down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yes, it is.
One of the other things you say, which I really like, is a poem is a photo made with words, right? So can you walk us through kind of what you mean by that? And how do we get going on a poem that is a photo made with words?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I start with this often with kids when I'm teaching in the schools, and I give them the metaphor and the analogy that if I were a photographer, I would go around through my life taking photos of things that were beautiful, things that moved me, things I wanted to remember, things that were sad, things that hurt, any kind of moment I wanted to remember. So I would take a picture of this, a photograph of this, but I'm not a photographer. I'm a writer. So as a writer, I want to capture this moment that moves me with my words. And I want to paint the picture with my words as though someone else were there seeing it with me in that moment. So as if I were handing you a pile of photographs that I'd taken from my day or from my week. Kimberly, here you go. Here's all the photographs of everything that moved me, good or bad, this week or today. And you'd say, oh, yeah, I see that moment and that moment and that moment. But as a writer and as a poet, I want to do the same thing. I want to hand you 5 poems I wrote today or this week that capture that moment and express and allow you to see what I saw and felt and experienced in that moment, almost as if you were looking at a photograph or a painting.
Which, you know what I love too, Meredith? It's like, okay, the example you gave earlier with tea. So, I had tea today, right? Versus I had X kind of tea that smelled like Y, that, was this color and in this mug and by the window, and, where you can get a visual versus, okay, if you tell me you had tea, I guess I can kind of see that, but I'm not going to get the detail, right? And so I love that idea of it's show, don't tell, right? To a degree,
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so much so. Yes, exactly. Show, don't tell. Like, I can tell you that I'm happy, or I can tell you that there's a yellow bird singing in my heart today. Right? So this is poetic language. I'm painting the picture for you, right? I can tell you I'm having a rough day, or I can tell you that I walked down my driveway today shuffling my feet with my head down and my shoulders rounded, right? And painting you that picture, giving you that photograph, that glimpse into this moment that evokes a feeling that we both know what that is. These are the universals. And this is one of the beautiful things about poetry, is that each of us are writing our unique story or a unique experience or perspective or perception. And yet, at the same time, there is a universal which makes poetry resonant for everybody. And that's a way of creating community. By seeing our commonalities rather than our differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. You also mentioned in the book some tips on writer's block. So can you share a few with our listeners? Like, sitting down to the blank page or the blank computer screen is always a little scary, a little intimidating. So what are some ways that you have worked with that over the years, or, encourage your students to work with it that you found to be quite helpful?
Such an important piece. Most of us will encounter a writing block at some point in our lives, and it can be very scary. And so one of the ways that I start is by asking people to change up their routine. So if you always tend to sit in the same place and write, or listen to the same kind of music, switch it up. And for me, I find that moving my body is very helpful. So I do a lot of my writing. I hike every day, and I do a lot of my writing when I'm hiking. There's something for me, being a kinesthetic, moving kind of learner. As soon as I put my body in motion, the ideas come. I can take a skeleton of a poem with me on a walk and flesh it out. And then I just keep saying it over and over to myself because I don't want to record it. And then I come back and then I write it down. So if you're a person who tends to sit still, try moving your body and then coming back to your writing, or taking an idea with you on your walk and weaving in the rhythm of your stride, the rhythm of your breath, your heartbeat, your pulse, and you'll find your own voice this way because it'll be so unique to you. And then another thing is, in the very beginning of the book, I offer a whole list of questions of how to break our own ice when we don't know how to get started, when we can't find the starting place. Questions that ask us, that invite us into what's really happening for me right now. What's something I've been holding inside that I really need to say to this person or that person. And it doesn't mean that you're going to go say it to that person, but our writing becomes a place where we can be absolutely honest with ourselves. And this is a refuge.
Yeah. Beautiful. Just great reminders, even from a mood perspective, right? Mm-hmm. When you're just like, just like not off to a great start. It's like moving your body, right? Yes. Like going someplace different in your home. I mean, these little things, they're helpful. Writer's block, it's helpful in so many different ways. Each of these tools that you just mentioned.
Yes. And for me, sometimes, because I'm a person who tends to write in absolute silence, so I can hear myself. If I'm really having trouble, I'll put on some music and start dancing in my house, just to shake up the thought habits and challenge ourselves and give us like kind of some new food.
I love that, new food.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, new food.
So my last question for you, Meredith, the name of the podcast, of course, is Tranquility du Jour. So I always like to ask guests, how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
Thank you. I love this question. Well, I am a person who has found my temple in nature, and from a very young age. Nature was the place I went to understand myself and listen for the truth. And through nature, I find the metaphors that teach me how to be human. So I spend time in nature every day. I spend my summers camping and writing at rivers and oceans, where I really feel woven into the wholeness of life and the hum of life. And this brings me incredible peace and tranquility. Also, I think sharing my poetry, sharing my songs with kindred souls, and listening to other people's creative expression, I find weaves me back into the family of things. I think we all suffer so deeply these days in isolation and aloneness, that to find the ways that we are all universally and uniquely human, and finding the things that fulfill us and sharing this with each other is so inspiring and empowering and helps us to claim the areas in our life where we do find peace and tranquility and creativity. Brings me so much fortification.
Yeah. You are in a beautiful part of the country for it, honey.
Yes. Yeah, I always choose where I live by where the best hikes are.
That's very smart.
That's very my criteria.
Smart. I love it. I love it. Well, congrats again, Meredith, on this beautiful book, Write a Poem, Save Your Life. And listeners, I'll be sure to have a link to all of her wonderful information in the show notes and also to the book. So thank you, Meredith, for being here with us.
So much, Kimberly. It was fabulous to talk to you.
So you can find our guest on Instagram, and there is also a link to her book. Both of these over in the show notes. And a gentle reminder to stay connected with me via our regular love notes. So these used to be weekly. Now they are occasional when inspiration strikes. So you don't want to miss one. They're invites, inspiration. You're always the first to know whatever is going on, and would love for that to be you. There's also a link to my 6 books and planner for those of you getting ready for 2022 and gearing up for an organizational system that's as much about being as it is doing. There's also links to follow along with me on Instagram and YouTube, occasionally Facebook, and then, of course, a link to my seasonless, eco-friendly clothing line, TDJ by Kimberly. Now, if you have a moment to share a review of this podcast, I would be so grateful, or any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads. There's a link to all of that, again, in the show notes. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, and thank you for inviting me and Meredith into your day. Have a great week.